Oh boy, is it time for more Path of Exile videos already? Yes, it is. And I'd like to start this series of videos complaining about Path of Exile with everybody's favourite current whipping boy, Bestiary League. But before we get any further, let me preface this video by saying that I only criticize because I love the game so much and I want it to be better. And it's not going to get any better unless, you point out the obvious flaws that the game has. And I think that now, the Bestiary is just doing so well and has been so popular that we're at a sort of a point where it's a good time to speak about how bad things have gotten in Path of Exile and maybe see a push back in a new direction, back towards perhaps better times. Who knows? Maybe we'll get there, but only if we all loudly complain about it. So, Bestiary League, not hugely popular, which I hope Grinding Gear Games can take as a wake-up call, and in many ways they have, with them pushing to get better quality controls on their content. However, I feel that in many ways they've missed the point with a lot of what Bestiary has and what's wrong with it. It's sort of a situation where they have a clear and distinct problem, but they don't really fix it so much as they put a band-aid over it, and that's sort of like, well, your arm's not falling off anymore, there's some band-aids holding it on. And it's like, well, that doesn't really fix the underlying problem, you're just really hiding it more than anything else. Let me give you an example. So, one of the problems with Bestiary is that you require specific beasts that you have to capture in order to use certain recipes. And let's say that you're aiming for a specific recipe, and thus you're on the lookout for a certain type of beast. The problem is, these beasts don't have a unique model or colouring. And by colouring I mean something that distinguishes what type of beast they are. All monsters with beast mods have a sort of reddish coloration to them, but that doesn't necessarily indicate what their base type is. So let's say an example that I saw on the forums was you need an Alpha Flame Hellion with a certain beast modifier on it in order to use for a recipe. How do you know that that's an Alpha Flame Hellion and not a Shackled Hellion with the exact same modifier? You can't tell. There's no way to visually distinguish between these monsters, at least not easily, especially given the fact that many of the higher level beasts have a tendency to summon extra monsters of similar type to swarm into you to make the encounter more difficult, making it in many ways a lot more difficult to specifically look at exactly what sort of beast you've got on offer here. Now, all of this could be changed and fixed if you would take something like having the beast's rare name and replacing it with a name's type. This is a Pharaoh Alpha Flame Hellion. Bam! I know exactly what that is. Instead of looking at that Hellion and going, this is Stink Stench the Foul, and going, well, that could be any old rare monster, I don't know what that is. And how has GGG addressed this sort of issue? Well, they've done something which I was sincerely hoping they wouldn't, and they just made the monsters tradable. Hey guys, don't worry about it. If you need an Alpha Flame Hellion, you can buy it off someone else. This really doesn't fix, number one, the problem of being able to know exactly what a monster is. And that's sort of compounded in turn by having a situation where summoners, or any sort of character build that uses culling strikes, have a distinct problem with capturing these monsters and using necromancy nets, which are distinctly rare, and you don't want to waste them on something. You're like, well, I don't know what this monster type is. Should I use a necromancy net here? Should I risk wasting this very rare resource? on this monster if I don't know what it is and I'm not sure, is this specifically the type that I want to use? Even the necromancy nets themselves are sort of a band-aid solution to a problem which was existing within Bestiary League, where, again, culling strikes, crit builds, summoners, these builds had a hard time capturing monsters because it was very difficult for you to not just kill them before you had a chance to catch them, and necromancy nets were introduced to address this problem. In addition to that, you've of course got the fact that the net icon on the screen showing you where your nets are, what kind of nets you're using, and how many of them you have, is out of place and it just looks bad on the UI. You've got the problem that there are so many different tiers of nets that this is just a fiddly pain in the ass when you could have had just one or two, maybe. You could have had high level net, low level net, necromancy net. That basically would describe what sort of monster you could catch with these nets. A low quality net could catch white or magic monsters. You need a high quality net for rare or unique monsters. Necromancy net doing what it does anyway. That sort of thing. But to go back to my earlier point with the thing where they just fixed the problem by just making everything tradable, it really does not address the core problem here, namely telling what sort of monster is this monster worth capturing when I'm out in the field and I see one. I still can't tell, and you making the monsters tradable so that I can just buy the monsters that I need, well, that doesn't help, and it really doesn't address the problem for players like myself who are solo self-found. I'm a dedicated solo self-found player. I've never traded once in Path of Exile. I'm never going to trade, and so when you've got an official support for this, you know, it would be one thing if Grinding Gear Games had not added official support for my particular playstyle, but they did. They went out and they've added support for official solo self-found mode. They need to think about these sort of things when they take these actions. Hey, we fixed it because you can now trade. Well, no, you've got an entire section of the community who has a non-trading mode. You need to think about these sort of things and really address underlying issues. And in so many ways, it feels like this is something that Grinding Gears has been doing for quite some time. For example, when I've been playing the game since before loot filters were really a thing. And so you would have so much loot on screen that it would obscure everything and you couldn't see what you were doing, and sometimes you'd get killed because you couldn't see. And it was like, GGG, these monsters, they're loot pinatas, but 99.9% of what they drop is such utter garbage that it doesn't need to be there. Please, fix your loot tables. And they went, hey, we've got a solution for you. Loot filters. These will let you customize your loot and whatnot. And you're thinking, well, no, this doesn't actually fix the underlying problem of the loot being unrewarding and things like that. Just fix your loot tables. Don't just hide the fact that the garbage loot is still there, that it's still dropping. It's still a problem. You've just found a way of sweeping it under the rug, of hiding it away. You haven't actually fixed this problem at all. That in turn has sort of led to the situation where, for example, bossing is not worthwhile in Path of Exile. I mean, for these videos, you're probably going to see me fight bosses, but for the most part, if I was just playing the game normally, I would kill Atlas bosses once for the sake of Atlas completion, and then never again, because they're not worth it. They too often drop nothing that is worth picking up. You know, you pick an item up and you go, wow, that's going right back on the ground where it belongs because it was terrible, when it's not even worth wasting my time vendoring this junk. And you've got some very extreme loot filters. My loot filter isn't even particularly stringent, and quite often it will hide everything that drops from a boss fight, or from a chest, or from a strongbox. And I think that, and that's the example, that adding loot filters was a band-aid. It didn't fix the underlying problem, and it's had knock-on consequences. I open strong boxes so that I can kill the monsters that they spawn, not so that I can get loot out of them. There's no risk-reward sort of situation going on there where I go, oh man, that's some really nice mods on that loot box, on that strong box. I'm gonna get some good items out of that. Do I risk going for it? No, not at all, because my loot filter will hide all of the stuff that comes out of there. Almost, it's insane how often they've sort of messed up this risk-reward sort of progression because of this insistence on not fixing their loot tables. And I understand why they haven't done it. It's because of the trade economy. If you make it so that players can get their equipment without trading, then they're not going to trade, especially because trade is such a hassle. But that's something for an entirely different video, and I think that we've gotten a little bit off track in this discussion so far. So let's pull this back towards bestiary and crafting overall. So, bestiary and beast crafting in and of itself is feature bloat. At least that's what I feel like. You see, crafting has always been somewhat underwhelming for the majority of the player base in Path of Exile. You can find videos where people are crafting mirror-worthy rares on YouTube, and from the number of them up there, you might think that this is a fairly common occurrence, but it's really not. You need to have a lot of currency in order to craft in Path of Exile, and it can reach a situation where, you know, the item that you end up crafting, while it's good, is not worth the currency that you put into it. I have very rarely done any sort of major league crafting, and again, that's partially solo self-found. With my currency, playing as a solo self-found player, really my main options for crafting are kind of just currency spam. I have to spam a lot of currency into an item in the hopes of getting something good out of random rolls, which is unfortunately very unlikely. And this is mostly because I've got no way of readily acquiring, you know, those higher tier currency items that you need for things like master crafting. Things like exalted orbs. I might get like one or none commonly in my leagues. I think the best that I've ever done was I had 4. I once had a map where I got 3 exalts drop in a single map, and that was pretty crazy, but then I had none in the next 2 leagues, so, you know, the luck sort of balanced themselves out there. But this lack of high-end currency means that, you know, I was limited in what I could do in terms of crafting, like serious crafting. And the only time that I've really ever done serious crafting is in Standard League, where I have access to the pools of currency which I've built up over time in my ordinary solo self-found league play. And in these cases, I've created some decent items. The problem is, those items aren't worth the currency that I've put into them. So you would think that in a lot of ways, being a solo self-found player, I would see Bestiary and this crafting league as being, yeah, this is a good thing, this is going to be good for me, I'm going to have a lot more high-end crafting options. The problem is that it doesn't feel that way at all. What it feels like is, unfortunately, and this is true of a lot of their content, that it's just a lot of bloat with a little bit of substance in there. And I think this is true, and most players have noticed it, that 99.9% of the recipes in Bestiary are bad. They're just terrible. I had tried to use the leveling item crafting recipes, because when you start off, everyone starts off the league in sort of a similar position. You've got to just make do with what drops, and sometimes that's not always great. So I was like, wow, no longer will I have to sort of weigh up, oh, do I want movement speed on my boots? What if it means sacrificing resistances or stuff? I really need to get some life rolls and stuff on my boots. I thought, hey, with the ability to target craft leveling items, I'll be able to do, a lot more here. This is going to be great. So I craft myself some leveling boots, and straight off, I can't choose the base item. That's annoying. Then there was the fact that, you only get one sort of guaranteed roll, and that guaranteed roll doesn't necessarily have to be good. I rolled a boots with increased movement speed, and I got 10% move speed, and I thought, that's not very good. And then I got something like 10 resist fire, 3 max life, and some flat life regen, and I'm thinking, those are terrible boots. So I try it again, and I get similar results. Increasingly terrible items, which they're too bad. They're bad. I can't use these items. There's got to be at least halfway decent rolls on there, and the crafting system just felt bad because I couldn't just keep recrafting these boots. Eventually I ran out of beasts, and I'm going to have to capture more of them in order to get, some better boots, or at least the hope of some better boots. In the end, I didn't get any of my leveling items out of the leveling recipes. I just got my gear the same way I always do, by picking it up off the ground, which is unfortunate for a crafting league. And in a lot of ways, it feels like, well, the crafting leagues are always weak, because if crafting was a strong option, it would sort of damage the trade economy, and the trade economy is the basis around which everything else is balanced in Path of Exile, and so crafting feels like the weak option. It's why I'm guessing most players don't bother to craft, despite the fact that you've got tools to craft with. It's because it's almost always going to be a better option to just buy something off the market. And that's really unfortunate, especially when your entire league is built around the notion of crafting. It's like, guys, the difference between this and standard, this league, it's all about crafting. But remember, it's always going to be the lesser option of trade. Trade being the thing that's always consistent across every league. So I guess this league feels kind of weak. Whoops. And yeah, there are some good crafting recipes in there, and there's definitely some that are worth keeping. Ideally, if they were to keep this crafting system, I'd say that they need to erase most of the crafting recipes because they're not worth the time. Or at least if you're going to have targeted crafting recipes for leveling items, make sure that you're getting a higher level, a higher tier roll for that specific thing, so that I don't end up with, like, I'm going to add a life roll to these boots. Oh wow, plus 5 max life. Why did I bother? You don't want to end up with that situation, so ideally, maybe a shift, if they wanted to keep these, that you're guaranteed to get that one good roll. Sort of like a more versatile essence craft, maybe. At least for the leveling items. There are plenty of good ones in there, which I'm sure I don't need to mention, that could be kept. But overall, I would much prefer them to rethink the entire thing, because there is one major thing that bothers me about the beast crafting system, and that is it feels like it is an entirely separate system to all the others. So what do I mean by that? I mean, when you first came into Path of Exile and you discover its currency system, it's brilliant. Quite simply put, one of the major problems with currency systems in any sort of game, especially games with an economy, is the fact that eventually the currency becomes devalued over time as it increases in both the size of the drops and the fact that everyone is also collecting it. You know, you go into Diablo 2 and you go, hey, I've got 1 million gold, and everyone goes, well, yeah, we've all got 1 million gold. That was impressive when you first started, but now everyone's got it. There's literally nothing to spend it on, and I don't want to trade it with you. My stash is full. I can't have any more gold than I already have. That's a problem. Path of Exile solved this problem by having them be a consumable trading item. Suddenly, it increases both the value of the items dropped on the ground. Wow, hey, that's a white 6-link item. goddamn, that's pretty rare, and I can craft it with my currency into something more suitable. This base is no longer useless just because it happens to be the wrong tier of rarity. This seems like a great idea until you realize the fact that they've chosen to balance the game around the trade economy, and in doing so they must make both drops and crafting lesser siblings to the market, because otherwise you have no incentive to use the market, especially given the fact that the market option is not good. In many ways it's controlled in a way that makes it less desirable to use. It's a pain in the ass, it's annoying, it feels archaic, especially compared to other games that have much more user-friendly ones. And I find this to be an incredibly strange thing to do, because honestly, if you have to restrict the market in such a way as to make it bad and unfriendly to use, like, here's the thing, if your game can't have an auction house with instant buyout, maybe rethink balancing the entire game around trade, because all you're doing there is just saying, it would be really bad for our game if trade were quick and effective. But then any trade is kind of going to disrupt the overall balance of your game, so maybe you should think about that as well. But that's just my 2 cents on that subject. But anyway, you have this currency, it's a crafting tool, and you could use it basically to just spam items until you got rolls that you wanted, and this wasn't a great system. Again, it was very much designed in a way that wouldn't disrupt your trade economy too much, and as such, many of the currency items ended up becoming trading tokens like gold, and they sort of lost that special edge that they had anyway by being a consumable crafting item. Then, of course, Forsaken Masters come along, and we see an introduction of master crafting come into the game at a later point, and this sort of builds upon the existing crafting system and enhances it by allowing you to have sort of a more deterministic approach to how you craft items. No longer are you just going to sit there and spam your currency at this thing for a few hours and cross your fingers and hope for that 1 in 300,000 chance that you get, you know, a worthwhile item. And that's literally the sort of odds that you're looking at. I could go into more detail, but I actually once did the maths. It's roughly 1 in 300,000 of getting a top tier item, and that's not even factoring in things like the fact that there are a lot of mods which aren't desirable. Like, you don't really want flat life regen mods. It's like, oh yes, I got a tier 1 and it's a flat light regen mod or a light radius mod or something like that. So it's actually worse than 1 in 300,000, but that's going off topic a little bit. This system added to the existing crafting system. They worked together, they synergized, and so they felt like they were part of one overall whole. And it was good. It was an excellent addition to the game and an improvement to crafting. It addressed a problem that existed in the crafting system and made it stronger overall. Next, we roll around to Essence League and the introduction of Essence mods, which, you know, when nice, they were okay. I never really used them because, again, they didn't really fulfill a necessary role. They had, in some ways, a deterministic chance of rolling something good. You got a guaranteed mod of a guaranteed strength that you could roll onto an item. The problem is that it re-rolled all the other mods, and every time that I've ever used an Essence, ever, they have ruined that item. It's not adding, you know, sort of, oh wow, I got one really good mod, and here's a couple of halfway decent mods, and yeah, this is an overall a good item. I'm glad I used that Essence. No, it's more like, wow, I saved up all these Essences, I ground them out until they were the highest possible level they could be, and then I slammed them onto an item, and it just low tier rolls, and it was awful. I'm thinking, wow, that felt like a waste of time and effort in order to use these. But if you had a lot of currency and you're really into crafting, then you can certainly use essences to craft some really powerful stuff. I think that this was the first case where it felt like, even more so than Masters, because Master Crafting definitely has a sort of a high-end currency cost for the real deal crafting, namely the Exalted Orbs. You've got to have them if you want to do some real serious crafting. But Master Crafting in a lot of ways was still good. If you were like, oh, I could really just do with some lightning resistance on these gloves, then you could put some lightning resistance on the gloves. You've got that deterministic option through Master Crafting. You could get that one Master mod and put it on. And if you didn't have Exalts, then yeah, you weren't going to do anything serious and spend a lot of your currency and remove it from circulation, which is the idea. But you couldn't do that, but you could still have some sort of options that were still useful to the bulk of the player base, which is ideally what you want it to be. Essence crafting in a lot of ways felt like it really wasn't accessible to the bulk of the player base. You're going to have a situation where if you've got plenty of currency to craft with, then you can use those essences to create something really nice. If you don't, you might create something good, but it's not going to be like, yes, oh, that was mind-blowingly great. I remember using, essences of insanity and stuff and ending up again with terrible life rolls, bad resistance rolls, and I'm just like, the only good thing on here is like that one guaranteed roll. And it feels like a shame, because I think this is a point at which I noticed distinctly and started going, oh man, they're never going to fix crafting. It's never going to be good, because if it ever was, it would have to compete with the market, and it's never going to work out. Because ideally what I would have done with the crafting system is I would have recognized a need, and that is essence slamming, not essence slamming, exalt slamming, and used essences to fill that niche. So what happens if you've ever crafted anything really high end is quite often you'll end up, you alt regal something, and then you've got to add more modifiers to it, and you end up with an item which has got a missing slot at the end of your crafting. It's got one more slot that you can add a modifier to that rare item. And there's no way of controlling really what this modifier is going to be. No way of guaranteeing that's good. So you just slam an Exalted Orb onto it, and half the time, well, hell, more than half the time, it's not worth doing. The only time that, again, that I've really done serious crafting is in Standard League with my accumulated currency. I slammed an Exalt on an item, and I really wish I hadn't, because those Exalts, they're rare. And when you get light radius or flat life regen or stun and block recovery, you're just like, oh god, what have I done? No! And essences could have fulfilled that role. They could have been put in a situation where, you roll an essence and you put it on right at the end. It's the very last thing you put on, but it guarantees that you're going to get a good roll on that item, and you look at that item, you go, what does this item need? I'm going to use this specific essence, etc., etc. And that would have really enhanced the crafting system and fulfilled a need within it. So, unfortunately Essence didn't, but hey, at least they still felt like they were part of the same overall crafting system. And this brings us finally around, by my long, meandering path, to Bestiary. It feels like it's a separate system, whereas the other crafting options feel like they at least work together. We've got currency and master crafting feel like they are part of the same system. Essence crafting feeling like it's sort of an addition to that system, even though it feels kind of a little bit off. Bestiary and beast crafting feel like they're entirely missing the point. They're not part of the crafting system. They're entirely separate. And in this way, it's sort of like saying, look guys, we've added a second crafting system. It's like, well, no. This makes the game feel like it's incomplete, like it's jury-rigged, like you've just stacked a bunch of new features on top of it. Guys, our game's got 6 different crafting systems. They don't work together, but, or they work together in a vague way. But overall, you know, you're going to be jumping between areas that you can do some crafting. Go to your menagerie and do some beast crafting, and jump back to your hideout to do some master crafting, and go and hunt essences, do some essence crafting. It's just like, oh, you want your entire game to feel like it is a cohesive whole, and in many ways I feel like so many of the mechanics in there, they feel tacked on. And I think that Bestiary League is the first league where it really feels like a lot of other people are noticing this, because I've noticed it previous to this, and I've gone, a lot of these mechanics, I don't feel like they belong in the game. They're not serving a need, they're not really addressing anything, they're just fluff, they're just extras that are there for the sake of adding a feature to the list of boxes on the store page, you know? And I'm hoping that in many ways this sort of feeling is going to rise up in the community, and Grinding Gear Games will go through and maybe address some of these problems, you know? Maybe bring this stuff together and attempt to make it into a more cohesive whole. To look at the crafting systems and go, what's the crafting system lacking? What does it need? And that's what we add in a crafting league, you know? That's what we add when we add new mechanics. I think that it would be great if at some point they seriously considered bringing crafting up to the level of the market. You know, make those two twins rather than one being the favored child and the others being the ugly stepsisters, you know. Unfortunately, drops are never going to be allowed to compete when you've got both a crafting system and a market economy, because yeah, you kind of have to have the drops be bad in order to encourage people to use the others. In an ideal world, I mean, I would balance around solo self-bound because that's what I play. But ideally, you should be rewarded for your adventures. It would feel much better, I think, the game, if, you know, you were fighting monsters and you went into high-level, riskier areas because you could get better gear and have better rewards and loot. Unfortunately, that's something that's missing from the game, and I think that crafting could have been the option that would fulfill that niche, you know, on the other side, where it's drops and then you craft to fulfill that last missing item, that thing that's missing. You know, it's just like, oh, I've got all these great items, but you know what I'm really missing? Some really nice resistances on a ring slot. You could craft that and to fill out that last slot, and that sort of gives you that crafting option. Unfortunately, it's currently in a situation where, yeah, it's trading. Trading is always the better option. You're kind of wasting a lot of currency if you want to do a lot of crafting, so you better hope that you've got more, because you're always better off just buying your items. And in this case, Bestiary League, they've sort of been like, well, we've got a lot of options for you to craft with, but there's so many recipes and so many of them are fluff, and there's beasts, and you can't tell what the beasts are just by sort of looking at them, and you don't really get excited over seeing a beast and going, yes, that's that one beast that I need in order to do the recipe. It's going to be great. I'm going to get that item and it's going to be fantastic. You don't get that experience, and instead they're like, but don't worry, because you can just buy them off other players. But, you know, that doesn't give you the same excitement. You know, you don't scroll through the market and go, oh my god, you guys, I'm so psyched. I'm going to scroll through PoE Trade, I'm going to go to some sort of trading website, I'm going to read all these item descriptions, I'm going to get really hyped. Maybe some people do. But I think that it would be great if they would just shift it maybe just a little bit towards the other side, away from the market, start focusing on the other stuff. You're not going to disrupt your market too badly if you enhance trading crafting options, because you would have another way of removing actual currency from, you know, the system. If you give that sort of just give those options, you can get some of the currency out of the system. It's not going to damage the economy too badly. But the last thing I think I've got to say about this subject is the fact that there is sort of like this sort of rising tide of people who are going, you know what, Bestiary actually wasn't so bad. there's a lot of profitability here. There's a lot of profitability potential here for you to make a lot of currency in these using these systems, and I'm thinking, oh god, please no. Because in a lot of ways, I feel like Path of Exile is becoming economy simulator, the game, and people are measuring the success or value of a league based on how profitable the mechanics are. I'm thinking, you know what would be nice if instead you made some challenging or interesting content that everyone could enjoy, and it doesn't even necessarily need to be, you know, super rewarding in terms of currency and junk. I would love to play more challenging content, which was just, you know, it's hard and fun encounters. Oh my. I would love to see that. You know, I would love to see you revamp some content and make it more difficult, make it more challenging, make it more fun, and that be the reward of that content, rather than having the reward for the content be the fact that you could make a lot of profit by playing it, because that's not exciting. That's not what I play an ARPG for. I'm not like, guys, Diablo 2 is adding a new expansion. It's going to double the amount of gold that drops on the ground, and I'm super hyped about that, because gold, picking it up, that's what I play games for. I play it for an economy simulator. That's where the real business is. Screw killing monsters and having enjoyable and fun, exciting encounters which are actual challenge. No, let's have more economy simulation. So yeah, don't forgive Bestiary League because, hey, maybe these mechanics aren't so bad and I could make a large profit by exploiting them. That's the attitude that I don't want to see keep rising up. It's like, actually, no, it's okay. This was a highly profitable league. No, the leagues should be enjoyable. They should be challenging, but in so many ways they're not. And I think now is the time to sort of push GGG back in the direction of making the ARPG and focusing on the ARPG side rather than the economic simulation side of things. But that's just my 2 cents, and if you'd like to disagree with me or just, you know, pat me on the back, that's also cool. Leave a comment, because I'll read it and maybe we'll have a discussion. Until next time, and when I complain about something else, and it'll be fantastic, and you can look forward to that too, and possibly disagreeing with my terrible opinions. Ciao!